Hello again, and welcome to another episode of the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliori. Joining me today is assistant editor Zach Palmer. How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Doing well. It's Thursday afternoon. The weekend, the long holiday weekend is within sight, so I'm pretty excited about that. Also joining me today is associate editor Joel Stocksdale.
Hey, guys.
Great show today here. We're going to talk a lot of cars. We've driven plenty of things lately. So if you like our reviews section, you're going to really like this podcast. Then we'll get into the news section. And of course, we will spend your money. Quick rundown here. We're going to talk about the Buick Regal Tour X, Honda Civic Touring, Kia Telluride, and the Land Rover Range Rover P400e. In the news, we're going to talk about some pretty good discounts on an NSX at your local Acura dealer. And Tesla stock takes a bit of a surprising beating. And lastly, spending your money on a car that should be a lot of fun. A Chicago guy is looking for a daily driver that he can also take to the track. So I think all this stuff is right in our wheelhouse. Let's jump right in. The Regal Tour X. This is a wagon, kind of almost like an all-road styled wagon, if you will. I actually went to the reveal of this a couple years ago. I remember Mark Royce was like, I appreciate all you guys calling this a wagon. He's like, it's actually not exactly a European, hot wagon hatch thing. He's like, it's kind of more of a crossover, which is what Buick is hoping to get here with this segment, like sort of another crossover. Mark Royce is GM's product guy. For those of you that don't know, I enjoyed this car. It's also pretty expensive. And it also has a fairly, and I think this is good for all of us as enthusiasts, a fairly robust segment. There's a lot of different options out there, including the Subaru Outback.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start. I really like this car. I really liked driving it. It's a really comfy, relaxed car to drive around, but it also doesn't feel like it sacrifices handling too much. Like it still corners adeptly. It's crazy spacious. It has so much room in it.
The back hatch, I very rarely this excited to be like, hey, let's pop the trunk, but that's kind of the point of this car. So I was pretty psyched to just, crawl around the back seat, put my kid's car seat in there, which fit very well. So yeah.
And I like the look of it too. It's an attractive wagon as is, and even though on principle I'm not a huge fan of the whole like throw flares on it and call it a crossover kind of thing, kind of works on this. I kind of like the way it looks. And I mean, if you gotta call it a crossover to sell it, whatever, I'm fine with that. If it means that we get wagons, I'm fine with that.
I 100% agree with that. Zach, you spent some time in it. You were pretty fired up. What do you think?
Yeah, no. So this was my first time in the Regal Tour X, and just like you said, I was pretty fired up about driving it. Just from the outside, it is a real stunner. Even with the whole black plastic cladding thing, it looks a lot like the Opel Insignia wagon that they sell over in Europe because it's a bit of badge engineering from Buick there. But I think it really works. It has a really premium look to it there. And actually driving it is a pretty serene experience as well. It's one of the softer rides of anything that I've been in as of late. You can just waft around wherever you go. The transmission, it's slow shifting transmission for the most part, but it's super seamless. And there is plenty of torque down low from that turbocharged 2-liter that's under the hood. So overall, super pleasing driving experience. And for those of you that, want to have a little more fun, you can skip the crossover and go with this, even if they might want to not exactly say wagon all the time, there's no mistaking this for an actual wagon when you walk up to it. It's got the long roof.
I agree. I think it's the kind of crossover, if you will, that would be pretty enjoyable to drive on a daily basis. Enjoyable like a GTI or a Camaro or a 911? Of course not. But is it more engaging than, a number of other crossovers? Sure, I think so. And I think, a couple thoughts here too, like as you really break this down. Ours came in at about $39,300, so not cheap. The base price of this specific one was about $35, though you could get a Regal Tour X for as low as just under $30, which is actually, I think, a pretty good deal, especially when you consider all the like incentives that you could get on Buicks at different points.
Yeah, so when we're talking price, I saw, I don't know, about a month or so ago, Buick is offering some huge deals on the Regal Tour X. I saw stuff on Auto Trader anywhere, upwards of $10,000 off, like the actual MSRP of a Regal Tour X, which at that point it starts to become a bit of a steal. Even though it doesn't actually like feel $40,000 inside. So with the discount, it definitely starts to like feel more like where it's priced at. But you're really gonna turn some heads, and people are gonna be surprised that this nice of a car with this much utility is actually sold by Buick.
Yeah, and I agree that the deals, the incentives really do go a long way to making this feel like a good value, because that is my biggest complaint with this car, is that the interior does not feel up to snuff. It seems kind of plasticky, and the plastics that are there, they're not super high quality, and even like the base one comes with like cloth interior, plastic steering wheel, not a whole lot of features for like $29,000. And part of my problem is that like you can get a really well equipped like Toyota Camry or Honda Accord for similar money, similar size, but nicer interiors. And that's my kind of primary gripe with the Tour X. It just doesn't feel as nice inside as a supposedly premium car should be.
Yeah, and it is that premium class, which if you look at it compared to the Subaru Outback that you brought up at the start there, Greg, the Buick is supposed to be nicer than that. It's supposed to be more luxurious inside. And if you do sit side by side with a semi-premium Outback and the Regal Tour X, I wouldn't actually say that the Regal is like $10,000 more than that Outback. It just the actual value proposition there doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But I feel like they're almost a car for a different kind of person, because an Outback, you have actual off-roading capability. It's for a slightly different crowd than the Regal Tour X. So I think that they both have their merits, as far as that goes.
And the thing is, now, while I complain about the Buick's interior, I would take the Buick over an Outback. And
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And
defend yourself.
The main reason is just that I think it drives a lot better. I think it rides better. I think it handles better. And especially the powertrain is way more refined than anything you're going to find in a Subaru. The engine is much smoother. It's got good torque. And the transmission is, like Zach said, it's seamless. It's just such a buttery smooth transmission.
It's an excellent powertrain. I think the Buick has an excellent powertrain. It looks really good. It would be tough for me. I think I might still lean Subaru. I think the interior, even though it's generally less expensive, is still a nicer interior, because I think Subaru has made such like significant gains in their interiors in the last 3-4 years that even though they are, I would say, like a lower positioned brand, it's probably better than where the Buick currently stands, even with that like premium, positioning. But that's a tough one, I think.
Yeah, no, especially, if you take into account the 2020 Subaru Outback that we saw in New York was about a month or two ago now. That has the new 2.5 liter turbocharged flat 4. So those cars are going to have similar powertrains. Subaru's getting rid of that 3.6 liter flat 6. I'd want to drive that car first, but just, looking at it from a specs, and after sitting in that new Outback, Subaru has advanced a lot with their whole interior design there. It would be a really tough call. I might actually have to lean Subaru, but it would have to be the 2020, not the one that's currently on sale, I think.
And I think that's why it's so hard for Buick and other brands to conquest customers. Is like, Joel's like, I'll give you credit. This is a great position. You're like, I think the Regal Tour X is better than the Outback. In many ways, it probably is. Zach and I are kind of like, well, it might be better, it might be not, but it's close. So given that, we'd probably lead Subaru, like you go with what's familiar. So, I mean, that's just a great moment, great example of why it is so hard to like conquest other buyers. And frankly, I think that's why Buick has struggled, because its vehicles are good, but are they that much better than some of the competitors out there? Probably not. And does it have some shortcomings, especially with its interiors? You know, we've seen a very similar situation with Cadillac, where they have these excellent products, but they're, you know, maybe they're sort of better, but not so much better to pull you out of your Mercedes or BMW, or they have like a crappy interior or something, and people can't quite get on board with that, or Q. And like, you know, it's a cutthroat market. You've got to literally go out and like, you know, dog eat dog, take the other guy's lunch. And if you don't do that, you know, just like sort of better isn't good enough.
Yeah, and like even with conquesting stuff, I mean, if somebody comes into a Buick dealer and like sits in a Regal and it's like, oh, this doesn't really seem all that much nicer than the Outback that I just looked at, and they might not even bother to take a test drive, and they might be missing out on what's really great about the car. And plus, Subaru has probably a more appealing image to a lot of people than Buick. I mean, Subaru has this whole like active, outdoorsy dog owner kind of
Is
image.
it legal to put a golden retriever in anything but a Subaru? I don't know.
And Buick, I mean, despite their concerted advertising efforts of that's a Buick,
Yeah.
I think people still like, oh, that's a Buick. Okay, I don't think they've really changed their image that much.
And I think that's tough because truthfully, if you look at the Regal Tour X and you just took the badges off of it and stuck it next to like an all-road, I mean, I think the Audi's probably better looking, but like really take the badges off, put it like same colors, same spec. I mean, are they that different of cars? Like, we're not talking about apples to bacon. We're talking about like apples to bananas here. And it's a tough one.
And they are technically both German wagons, since this is
Yeah,
since
good
this is
point.
Opel.
You're right.
That's a really good point. Yeah. So I think we've done a lot on the Buick. Let's move along to the Honda Civic Touring, which we had through the fleet. It was a very nice car. I took it home one night this week. Ours came in at $28,220. The base price, or the MSRP, excuse me, was $27,300. This one was, you know, a number of things on there. Came in cosmic blue with a gray interior, 174 horsepower, 1.5 liter four-cylinder, hooked up to the CVT. This is one of the, like, I'd say mid-level Civics. I thought the interior was a little like pedestrian, not offensive, but when I got inside, I was like, oh yeah, this is what a $27,000 Civic costs. But I'm still a big fan of the Civic's design, like the taillights, the headlights, just the whole silhouette. I think it's a great looking car, perhaps best in class. So I enjoyed my night in this car. Didn't do anything crazy with it, but it's fuel efficient, fairly fun to drive. I like the chassis. It's pretty good. Steering's pretty solid. But what did you guys think?
Yeah, so the Civic, you know, moving into the 2019 model year now, it's been out for a few years with this new platform, with this new body style, and I think that it has been aging really well over those few years. You know, it's still right at the top of the compact car segment as far as I'm concerned, and you know, this being the Touring, you know, it has pretty much all of the goodies on it, and that 1.5 liter turbo, you know, when they pair it with their CVT, their CVT is actually, you know, a semi-enjoyable transmission to use with that engine, just because you're able to keep the revs low and use the torque that you get from the turbocharger. But you know, one of the biggest things with me about the Civic is that, you know, they really care about making it fun to drive for people. You know, it has a super playful chassis. The car, you know, you actually feel connected to the road when you're driving. It's, you know, there was a concerted effort made by Honda to make that car feel fun, even though it's not the SI or the Type R. It's still, you know, I still had a ton of fun, you know, taking it around corners, you know, not really running through the gears, but actually flooring it. The car is quick. But at the same time, you know, when you talk about it like looking the best in class, Now with the new Mazda 3 out there, I have a few questions as to who's actually top dog in the compact segment. I don't know. What do you think about that, Joel?
Yeah, I think that's something we should definitely discuss really quickly. I do really like the Civic. I feel like it's
You're
got
a Civic owner, in fact, right?
yeah, I've got an '08 Civic Si. um, but yeah, I genuinely like the car. Handling is really good. Ride quality is great. It really kind of feels like a baby Accord. Like it just kind of has that. It's so well rounded. It does everything really well. I wasn't super thrilled with the powertrain. I mean, the engine is good. It makes good torque and stuff, but between being turbocharged and having the CVT, felt like throttle response was kind of mushy. Kind of like it just didn't really it didn't feel very sharp and responsive.
I didn't love the CVT.
No.
It kind of, I wouldn't say it hamstrings the car, but it's not great.
Yeah, and it definitely it feels like it sucks some of the fun out of it. But the handling is great. I like the interior. I love the low dashboard and the thin pillars. Like it feels airy. Like visibility is great. And it's huge inside. This is easily like one of the roomiest small cars on the market. As for Civic versus 3, I think it would probably come down to what your needs are. If you don't have a family or just generally don't have like backseat passengers very often, hands down, I would get the Mazda 3 every single time. The 2.5 engine in that is really responsive. It makes good power. Mazda's automatics, like even though they're like kind of old school 6-speed autos, they work really well. Like they don't shift a whole bunch. They shift pretty quickly. And with a manual transmission, it's a blast. The handling is amazing. The interior feels almost like a luxury car. But if you have like a family, the Mazda 3 is cramped. Like the back seat is small on those cars. And that's definitely not the case in the Civic. The Civic is huge. It's got so much space.
I was able to put a car seat back there, no problem. I was almost surprised how easily I was able to get it back there. I did have to move the seats a little bit. It's not like it's a huge SUV, but for what it is, sure, pretty good amount of room. Mazda, if I recall, did we have the hatch or the sedan a while ago?
I think we've had
both of
yeah.
them.
We've had both,
Yeah.
so I'm sure I put the car seat in that too. What I had to do with that one was actually push the passenger seat all the way forward, then stick the car seat in there. So kind of hard to describe in audio, but if you know what I'm saying here, it's like the difference in volume is noticeable is what I'm saying. And it's like the Civic, it feels like how a midsize car used to feel even a few years ago.
Yeah. The Civic is it's as big as midsizers from the past. And actually, the other thing, in addition to being spacious, what's also nice about the Civic is that you get a lot of power and torque, but you don't sacrifice fuel economy. Fuel economy is really good on the Honda Civic. Depending on the trim, I mean, you're getting close to like 40 mpg on the highway.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I found in my like 50-mile commute, I was getting about 33, 34 mpg. That's like a combination of city and highway. So pretty happy with that for the amount of power. And I think you really just hit it spot on with the Mazda 3 versus Civic argument there. You know, the Mazda 3 is definitely, if you're just going to be driving by yourself in there, it's a much more luxurious experience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that I think it's quieter. I actually think that it rides a little bit better and handles better than the Civic does. And the actual interior, I think, just works better in some ways. Honda actually fixed one of my biggest gripes with a Civic's interior for 2019 was they added a volume knob. Before they had this little touch capacitive slider that would just infuriate me to no end.
That was the worst.
Yeah. And having those physical shortcut buttons helps too.
Also those, yeah, like that's a huge thing. Like if you were, you know, somebody that didn't like that before and you're on the Honda lot, look at the 2018 or 2019, like go get the 2019 because you're gonna love the fact that it actually has a volume knob on it and you can do that.
I will say though, I wish they'd gone a step further with the infotainment, because they added those physical buttons, but the whole infotainment like operating system is still the old one.
It is, yeah.
And I hate that system. It's what they had in our long-term Ridgeline too, and it runs slow. It's not very responsive. The graphics are pretty ugly. It
looks very dated, I think, even though it's not all that old. But
and what really frustrates me about that is that the Honda Insight has the new infotainment system that they use in the Honda Accord and in the the updated Honda Pilot, and the Insight is basically a hybrid Civic. So it's like they're so close. They could totally move it over, but they haven't yet, and it bothers me. And it's like it would be a fabulous improvement over the current system.
I actually think and I used to say Civic, top of class, just ahead of the Mazda 3. But as I think about it and think about my impressions of having driven both recently, I would probably actually push the 3 ahead of the Civic for the better interior and just the overall looks and the fun to drive element. Other podcasts, we've talked about how some car makers are really getting interiors right. Audi historically, Lexus at times. And I would put Mazda now in that category. Same with Subaru. They're sort of like graduating to, hey, we know how to do this. We've been impressed with these things. And that's where those Mazdas we drove, Mazda 3s we drove were not, expensive, not high spec cars. And then they just were very nice cars. And I remember thinking when I got out of the Civic a couple nights ago, oh, man, this door panel doesn't feel too good, or geez, okay. So still an excellent car, but I might be moving to the point where I'm ready to push the 3 just a touch ahead of it.
Yeah, and there's, if you decide to go with the Mazda 3, you actually have the option for all-wheel drive now, which could be
that's a great point.
A huge deciding factor if you're, in a winter climate, and that is one of your main things that you're looking for. And for a Mazda 3 with all-wheel drive, with all the goodies that you might get in a Civic, they're right about on par with the price. Our Civic was just about $28,000 here. I know after spending a lot of time on the Mazda 3 configurator that you can get a really nice Mazda 3 for about the same price.
Mm-hmm.
So,
if you, on the other hand, looking at things from every perspective, if you want a manual transmission, but you're on a budget, the Honda Civic is probably a better way to go, though.
You're right about that.
Because you can get a Honda Civic Sport hatchback with a manual transmission. That's the turbo engine with a manual with a hatchback for low $20,000 range. Whereas on a Mazda 3, you can only get the manual in the top rung hatchback with all the features, and that's high $20,000 range.
Yep. And then even you could get the Honda Civic Si. That has a ton of the options that you get on some of the more expensive Civics, with more power, better handling. It's a true enthusiast little Cooper sedan.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's right around the same price range as a nice Mazda 3.
Yeah.
So you gotta consider all those trims there.
Yeah.
The last time we rated a Mazda 3, which was pretty recently, it was April, in fact, we gave it an 8 on the Autoblog score. So if you're on the site, you'll see this on some of our articles. And we did give it an editor's pick. So obviously we like it. It's been a while since we did the Civic. The last one, in fact, was a Type R in November. That was interesting. We had a Type R in November. We also gave that an 8, but that, I should note, is the Type R. So we are about due to do, I guess, an overall Civic kind of rating. We did give the Type R an editor's pick too. So we obviously like both cars. I will say this, if you do have one child or whatever, you might lean Civic just because of all that extra space inside. It is a more practical car, slightly.
Yeah, I think it's if you need something that's genuinely practical but still good, get the Civic. If you want to treat yourself a little bit, get something a little nicer, a little bit more fun, go Mazda 3.
So speaking of things that are practical and I think pretty good, we had the 2020 Kia Telluride in the fleet for the last week. Lovely SUV. I'd say it's a pretty good value too, considering ours is 46,860. This came in a shade called Dark Moss, which kind of looks like a slightly darker British racing green. I think it's a really good looking SUV. 3.8 liter, 6-cylinder, 8-speed automatic. Base price of this one was just under 44. So this is definitely all-wheel drive, I should mention too. This is definitely a critical vehicle for Kia. Perhaps the most critical, SUV they've ever launched. This is their big 3-row SUV that's meant to take on the big guys, to give them credibility. They went for it as far as the design. Like, I think when you looked at what Volkswagen did with the Atlas, you got the wheel wells that kind of stand out. But that's about it. It looks like exactly what you would expect a Volkswagen SUV to look like. Maybe like, hey, let's take an Explorer on the board, then kind of riff on that. Kia didn't do that. They were like, we're going to do a Telluride, and there's a ton of like design going on here, the different cues, the headlights, the taillights. I pulled up to a stoplight on Woodward, and a bus driver actually looked over and was like pointing at the car, and she was like, what is that? And like, wow, I didn't expect the Kia Telluride would get this much attention. And somebody else at Kroger was like, that's a nice car. I kept thinking to myself, do they know this is a Kia Telluride? Do they know what a Kia Telluride is?
So basically, you were getting the reactions that Buick wants people to have reactions to their cars
Absolutely.
too.
Absolutely. People were like, what is this thing? And I think the color and the dark wheels, I think it's a pretty sweet looking SUV.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, I liked it. I've signed it out twice now. What'd you guys think?
I really like it a lot, and way more than I was expecting. And actually, after I learned the price, so often with cars, be like, oh yeah, I really like that car. And then I see the Monroney and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I like it as much anymore. But with the Telluride, it's $46,000. It actually feels like it's worth $46,000.
I totally agree.
It's really refined and quiet when you're driving it. The engine is smooth. The transmission is smooth. And the interior on this one is like decked out.
Mm-hmm.
It's got nice leather, had the big widescreen display for the infotainment that comes out of the Kia K900 luxury car. This even had like a faux suede Alcantara roof liner. It was like, this is...
I couldn't believe that. When I was like, what's going on here? And even like the faux wood, I assume that's not real wood.
Yeah, I was feeling it. I was like, there's no way this is real wood.
But I'll say this, it looked pretty good.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, oh geez, they put more faux wood in this car. That's so cheesy. But it worked. I can't believe it.
Yeah, I was thoroughly impressed. And it, like, the ride and handling feels good. It, like, obviously it's not a sports car, but there are some crossovers in this class that really kind of roll and float and don't feel so great. But this feels buttoned down, and it's a good crossover. I really like it.
I'd put it ahead of the Ascent and the what else would I put? The Volkswagen Atlas. I feel like Kia's really leapfrogging people here with this thing. And that's a great thing.
Yeah, no. So the first time I saw it, I was actually getting some slight Range Rover vibes from the boxy shape. And that is pretty weird to feel that out of a Kia, to actually, that British luxury almost feel.
Dark green probably helped too.
The dark green, I think, definitely helped with those black wheels. But no, so I spent some time, crawling around all 3 rows. And the thing is like stupid utilitarian. Like you get in the back and there's just oodles of legroom back there, and if you want to crawl into the back from the second row, there's actually enough space that, a small kid could squeeze on by, and you don't actually even need to put the second row seat up. But if you do, there's a really cool little button just sitting right on top of the seat. Just one press of that and the seat slides all the way forward, jacks up, and it's perfect.
That's
like
nice.
Anybody can get back there super
I
easily.
wish I had found that, because I didn't find that. I was trying like dancing around the back seat, trying to get my golf clubs back there. So I wish I had found that button.
Yeah, no, it was like one of the most intuitive like ways of getting into the third row that I've seen any manufacturer do. So big props to Kia for doing that and getting it right the first time, because like that's the whole point of this vehicle, is to be used by a family. and load a bunch of people in there. And then when you actually fold all the seats down, there's a ridiculous amount of room in the back too, because they went with a nice boxy shape instead of trying to cut the roof off, do a whole slant and everything for style. I think that this thing wins on style and utility. So
Kia actually, I don't think we need a Telluride like performance coupe or anything like that. Like keep the boxy design like that.
Oh, but you know what would be kind of cool? It would be kind of cool if they did like a short wheelbase, like 2-door version of it, like the old like K5 Blazer, or even like even later the like Tahoe like the 2-door Tahoes.
I am a big fan of 2-door SUVs.
Yeah.
I 100% want more of them, and I don't understand now that basically everybody's making crossovers in every segment. Nobody's brought back like the coupe crossover. What the hell?
Yeah, I mean,
Kia
I'm
probably
sure,
doesn't need to do it with the Telluride.
No.
They're not the ones who need to go down this road, but
and I'm sure it would be difficult to find a market for it, but it would be cool.
it would be awesome. And I mean, with a Telluride, I'm not sure that it would have like the actual off-road cred that a 2-door SUV needs.
It might be able to get away with it because it's like nobody takes their SUVs off-road unless they have like a Jeep Wrangler.
This is true. Yeah.
Or like a pickup truck. I mean, people with pickup trucks go off-road more often than anyone with an SUV.
That's true. That's true. I feel like it could kind of like stomp on the baby Bronco when that eventually comes out, because similar size, similar use. The baby Bronco isn't going to be like a super off-road ready truck. That's going to be the big Bronco. So yeah, I don't know. Like, do it, Kia. It would be fun.
For a second there, I'm like, are you talking about the Telluride versus the baby Bronco? Then I had to like mentally scroll back and be like, oh, he's talking about a 2-door hypothetical Telluride. This car we made up to fight another car that doesn't currently exist on the market yet. That's awesome. That's podcasting right there.
Yeah, we're really getting down the rabbit hole here.
We need a
guys.
few superheroes, baby. But back to the Telluride. I mean, honestly, this thing I think is one of the better values in this segment. I think it might be the best value in this segment because it is so decked out. And I think you can also see like Kia and Hyundai have both done a really good job of crafting these, like, I would say try to do one better strategies, because almost not every, but many segments are still new to them. So when they jump into them, they really think holistically and they look at every part of the vehicle. And because they're not there yet, it doesn't seem like they ever try to rush a product. And they look at all the things other people have done well. And I think you see a lot of this with the Stinger too. Like they looked at everybody from like, BMW and Mercedes to like, some of the American like muscle coupes. And I think they really did a good job of making the Stinger what they want it to be and what they want it to be for their brand. And same thing with the Telluride. So I'm thinking this is going to be a really strong vehicle for years to come. Now, in some ways, it'll face some of the challenges that all Kias face, which is, do you want to drive a Kia? Some people don't. I think the name might actually really help it. And this is kind of getting a little, tangential here. But when you see like Telluride on the back and you look at just all the different design cues, you have no idea who makes this thing at first. I mean, the Kia badge isn't that big. You might think Telluride, you're like, what is that? Like an Acura or something? And, so I think that could be a good thing to get people who maybe have like sort of brand loyalties or perceived like, biases for or against certain brands. I don't know. I think Telluride is just a really strong name for this thing.
I totally agree. And like the point you make there about, like the big logo on the front and back being the huge Telluride instead of that Kia badge, I think that's definitely going to make a difference when people see it. One of my weird small complaints about the Stinger is that like it doesn't say Stinger big anywhere. Like it's in a really small script on the actual hatch lid there, and that you got the two massive Kia badges.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because I have seen, I don't know if it's like an option package that I just can't find, but I have seen Stingers where instead of the Kia logo on the back, it has the full Stinger script written out on the hatch, like almost Porsche style.
That's very cool.
It looks fantastic. And like I have nothing against the Kia brand. It's totally fine if this has a Kia badge on the back, But the Stinger logo just looks way cooler. Just in general, it's a cool font. And it's a good name. It's cool to see it all spelled out big on the back.
I agree totally.
So that's a thing in Korea, actually. That's what they do there. And actually, the new Stinger GTS that they had in New York, I think, that actually has Stinger written out on the trunk lid instead of the Kia badge. So we are getting it here. You just have to get the new GTS that has their drift mode and different limited slip. And I'm sure it's something you could do aftermarket if you really didn't want that Kia badge there.
Very cool looking car. But let's move along to our last thing in the fleet this week. Another SUV, the Range Rover HSE P400e. That's a lot of letters and numbers, and you're probably like, what is this thing? Well, for starters, it's a $109,000 plug-in hybrid. 2.0 liter 4-cylinder gas engine with an electric motor. The total system output is pretty healthy. 398 horsepower, 472 pound-feet of torque, 8-speed automatic transmission. They actually had pedals. I didn't even notice those. But so it's a pretty robust powertrain hooked up to all-wheel drive. So, I mean, this is a really interesting vehicle, I think. It's, you do get about 30 miles of range on electricity, which was very usable. It's kind of right a little bit below like what the Pacifica will offer you. That's a Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid minivan, for those of you that aren't familiar with our long-termer. And this is just it's a solid vehicle that I think, it looks good. It's good for, I think, just sort of getting like green cars into that luxury space. I really enjoyed driving it.
Yeah, I think if I was going to get a Range Rover, I would probably get the plug-in hybrid. And the reason for that is just, it's not really, well, I feel this way with a lot of like big SUVs and big cars. I don't necessarily want a whole heaping huge amount of power, just because it's like the whole rest of this car does not feel like it wants that kind of power. It's not designed to go crazy fast and handle really well. It's designed to be really comfortable, go off-road. It doesn't need to go fast. And like, if I can get high 30 mpg on like a short, like hour-long drive or something, kind of a blend of gas and electric, that's awesome. And if I can just be like in the lap of luxury in like this prestigious-looking SUV, even better.
It's a beautiful car, beautiful SUV, that's for sure. One, like I would say, quibble. This one, Byron Blue, the exterior color, which in a vacuum, very nice. The color of the sky, I guess, if you will. It had gray accents. So I'm looking at this thing like from my living room, like what's going on with the quarter panels there? And like on like Land Rovers, you want to see those like arguably iconic like accents on like the quarter panels and things like that, and you couldn't see them. So I'm like, that's just not how I would spec mine out. But
I actually like the paint color combo, but
yeah, okay, fair enough. I mean, that's why they offer these things. Pretty functional. I put a bunch of stuff in the back of it, bunch of boxes. Also fit the car seat. Got to drop that in there, as you could in a huge SUV. Infotainment system. I don't know. Where are you in Land Rover's infotainment systems these days, Joel?
I don't think they're very good. They like, there's just a variety of issues. Like the touch, they've gone to almost too many touch controls, and I've never felt like their touch controls have been that great. They do some cool styling stuff, like the climate control knobs are kind of integrated into the touch screen, which looks really neat, and you can use them to like toggle between the air temperature and your seat temperature and stuff. It looks neat, but it's not the most usable. I would get used to it over time, but it's nothing intuitive about their infotainment system.
Yeah, I've had a couple of, less than stellar experiences with my last two JLR infotainment systems. I remember one not too long ago was in the Land Rover Discovery, actually. I just found like the whole system was just super slow to respond. It eventually does what you want it to do. It just takes another, 1-2 count beyond what most infotainment systems do. Just a couple functions that may or may not have been working correctly. But I will definitely give them points for the whole elegance factor. It looks really, really good. Maybe there just needs to be a little more on the execution side of things there to make all the electronics work as they should in your over $100,000 Range Rover.
They just got to get it right. I don't know if they need to maybe try a different supplier or just rethink the whole thing. I mean, generally blowing up your infotainment system when it doesn't work, I mean, I guess it's kind of like a no-loss situation. It can't get any worse. It's something I think JLR is going to want to look at because it is going to start to hold back who they are and what they do when they're doing so many other things well. And, you know, they have a very, when you look at like sort of JLR as a company itself between Jaguar and Land Rover, they have a pretty healthy, like well-rounded portfolio, and infotainment systems are a part of that these days. So
I will admit things have improved in the last few years because the older infotainment screens were a lot worse. They were less sharp, they were less responsive, and even less easy to kind of like parse. It just they have improved, but everybody else is improving even more, which is they're just still behind is the thing.
yeah, totally agree. And I think less is more. That's something we're seeing. Ford kind of figured that out. They made Sync, a little bit better, and I mean they made it better by making it simpler. And I think that's something that Land Rover could do, Jaguar and Land Rover could do. Just kind of chill out. Yes, it looks good, but it doesn't have to be all these different functions and interfaces. Just get back to basics. I mean, frankly, I think that's what a lot of, you know, Jaguar for sure, and many Land Rover buyers will want. Simple as good.
Yeah.
Now, something that I've been thinking about lately is that for the longest time, so some of you may know, I've not been a big fan of the Mercedes G-Class, at least until the recent redesign. And something that was always in the back of my mind is that, like, if you think you want a G-Wagon, what you actually want is a Range Rover.
Okay. That's an
Now-
interesting school of thought, but
Yeah.
okay.
Well, because the thing is, at least with the older G-Class, I mean, that thing just, it didn't drive well.
It was rough.
Yeah, it felt like it would tip over in corners, and it was cramped, and the windows all had glare everywhere, and it wasn't very good. Now the new one has improved a lot, so I'm not entirely sure if my train of thought works anymore, because I do really like the Range Rover.
I see what you're saying though. Like you want a flashy SUV, you're loaded, so you want something that reflects your status in life, I guess.
And
G-Class is tough to drive though, and it's like your average, you know, maybe rich dude doesn't want to work that hard to drive it, and then when he or she gets it, they're working way harder to drive it. Whereas you get a Land Rover, you're like, oh, this is easy to drive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one thing to just bring the conversation back to the actual P400e, I really like the idea of a plug-in electric with a luxury car.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it just enhances the amount of like luxury feel that you have because, you know, instead of a quiet inline-six V8, what have you, that Jaguar or Land Rover has, you're riding around in complete silence.
Mhm.
And I think that is, you know, one of the like the main tenets of luxury is that just super serene ride that you get. And, you know, that's one of the things that you get with the Range Rover P400e. You get to ride around, you know, using just electricity.
Yeah,
Well said.
and
Well said.
I've loved almost every luxury plug-in hybrid I've driven. Like the Cadillac CT6 plug-in was easily my favorite version of that car, and a big part of it was because it was a hybrid, and having that electric motor meant the kind of coarse and rough gas engines that Cadillac was putting in the CT6 wasn't really running all that hard, so it felt way more refined, and it was still really fast. Actually, the Range Rover hybrid that we had, that was pretty quick too. I popped it into sport mode and was racing off of stoplights. It would hustle.
It was quick. Yeah, it was definitely a runner. I think that's another thing too, is like consumers start to rethink luxury. They're just going to expect that their luxury car might just offer you 30 miles of electric range. And automakers are looking at it as like, hey, we want our brands to like, place our flag. We're a green brand. That's who we are. But consumers are just going to be like, well, just this is what I expect. I expect my large SUV in the past to have a big V8 because that's what it was supposed to have, or my watch to have this kind of movement just because that's what I expect it to have. And that's how much this costs. I think, just baked in, natural, organic, 30 miles, maybe in a few years, 100 miles of electric range. That's just going to be par for the course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So speaking of luxury, why don't we move along to the news section? Leading things off, we've got some news out of Acura. The NSX, of all things, is actually getting some surprising discounts. Zach, you wrote the story. You've got a lot of built-up NSX knowledge. Take us through what's happening.
Yeah, so the news here is that there's currently a $20,000 incentive on the 2019 NSX. So the story was first reported by Motor Trend, and we asked Acura what was going on there, and they confirmed for us that yes, the $20,000 discount is in order right now. It's been going on since March and is scheduled to last into next year, actually. So that means that your $159,300 Acura NSX, which is the base price, goes down to $139,300, which is a pretty hefty discount on a supercar. You don't always see big discounts like that on supercars. A lot of times they just jack the price up like crazy with options, but because the NSX has had some trouble selling since its massive reincarnation back in 2016, they want to move them off the lots, which, makes sense. You want your flagship car out there, and this is the biggest discount that we've ever seen on it before.
It's, I think it speaks to the fact that the NSX had a very strong initial sort of just, resonance. People were excited about it. I remember going to the reveal a few years back. Jerry Seinfeld was there. People were so fired up about this car. Hey, the NSX is back. People were talking about the first generation of it, what it meant. This one seemed more sophisticated. It offered, all sorts of different things you could do. A very, I'd say, like sharp, raw design. I mean, it's really something to look at, but it appears the market is a little softer than they thought. Or maybe that like all the people who wanted one have bought one, and now it's still like they're not conquesting any new customers from, say, Porsche or McLaren or people that they had hoped to bring into the Acura brand. $20,000, even on a car that costs this much, is a good deal of money. I mean, if you look at it like in a percentage, all right, it's not maybe as crazy as it sounds, but it's still a good chunk of money. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see like what else they do with the NSX. Are they going to like, iterate with it? Or they come up with different options? Because I don't think long term, that's not what you want to do, be throwing that much money on the hood of your flagship supercar.
No, there's a whole lot of opportunity if Acura Honda wanted to do something with the NSX. What they've done with the new one is they've, dove headlong into electrification, and they have the 3 electric motors supplementing that 3.5 liter twin turbo V6. And, what you end up there is a very different car than what the original one was. And as Greg alluded to, I have a pretty long personal history with the NSX. There's been a 1991 example in my family for a while now, and we absolutely love the car. So I actually got the chance to drive the 2019 NSX not too long ago. Did a bit of a comparison piece that you can read on our site. It actually just went up here recently.
Check it out. It's a good read.
Yep. So definitely check that out. But, some of the problems that the new NSX might be having is because it's, not exactly like the original one. They may be going after that same goal of creating a new sports car experimental, in that they're using the highest technology of the time. The original one had that all aluminum monocoque. It had the wild VTEC engine that revved to 8,000 RPM. There's a lot of firsts with that car, and what that ended up giving you was a car that was, one of the best driver's cars as far as road feel, handling feel, and just feedback from a car that of any vehicle out there. And the new one being electric everything, it's by wire pretty much everything out there. It just doesn't offer that same rawness that the original did, and that might be one of the reasons that people are not really flocking to it like they were. Acura, they think that it is the proper successor to the original, but there's just not everybody is convinced of that. That's for sure.
I really enjoyed driving the NSX. I've driven it a few times. I drove the old one of the generation that you have, your family has. And I would say in the context of each of those time periods, the original generation felt more special. If you go back to the 90s, Ferrari, Lamborghini, they were making borderline junk at that point. They were still trying to find their way. Porsche was trying some different things. BMW, of course, was actually kind of about to go into a bit of a golden age. But Acura really stood out in they had a car that was more advanced and in some cases less expensive than its key competitors. Everybody put it on their cover. It was just such a huge step forward. When you fast forward now, the car is awesome. It's great. You can't drive this thing and not come away and think, oh, that was really good. It leaves you with a smile on your face. It's sophisticated in ways other cars out there aren't necessarily, but there's so many more really good, viable competitors from a range of different, car companies and even price points that I don't think this new NSX overachieves like the old one does. And I think that really is the crux of why it's not resonating as strongly as perhaps Acura thought it would, or after the initial wave, it's not having that extended period of growth.
Yeah, I think that's definitely getting at the main issue. The NSX is really good, but I don't know if it's exceptional enough in any particular area. I don't think styling-wise it's hugely stand out. Granted, I feel like a lot of mid-engine supercars right now are starting to look a little bit generic, kind of like they're all starting to look a little bit like each other. But even some other sports cars that offer similar performance have a bit more of a standout identity. I mean, the Nissan Gtr, it's got big name recognition because it's had lots of generations of high performance supercar killing variants, and it's still a very distinctive looking car. It's very blocky and tough and kind of a bulldog look. And I mean, the GTR, you can get it with more power than there's lots of things that deliver a whole lot more numbers than the NSX.
Yeah,
the NSX is 500 horsepower and 400 some pound-feet of torque. I mean, you can buy Corvettes with way more power for less money. I think it also didn't help that Honda really dragged out the reveal process on the NSX.
I was just thinking that.
I mean, they had buzz. They showed an almost production-ready concept, and then it was an entire year before we saw the actual production car, which was barely any different. And I mean, we'd been hearing about NSX for years before we saw that almost production-ready concept, and they just dragged it out, and a lot of the excitement kind of died down. It also didn't help that the production NSX came out the year that Ford decided to surprise everybody with the GT at the same show, which wasn't good either. And I mean, it was two twin-turbo V6 mid-engine sports cars at the same show. One of them we'd been hearing about for ages and wasn't big news. The other, no one had heard about until the show happened.
That's a great point. And so you can overcome those publicity stunt things, if you will. But I mean, that was immediately the other team is like, intercepting you, at the goal line.
Mhm.
Ford really stole their thunder. And I think, I just think by the time, your point is so on, Joel, by the time they finally got this thing out and really went about marketing it, it just seemed like other people had gotten in the fray and even eclipsed what they were going to do.
Mhm.
And it just, it took them too long in some ways to get it out. But
And I mean, this is not to diminish the NSX because it is a really good car. And one of the things that I think sometimes gets lost in a lot of the comparing new versus old is that the new one is super easy to drive. It's really quiet. It's comfortable. The visibility is excellent. And that's something that the original was known for, was being a daily drivable supercar. Like, it was something that would be easy to deal with on a daily basis. And the new one definitely does that. And I'm not entirely sure Honda gets enough credit for having nailed at least that part of the NSX.
yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you try and line up the new NSX versus like a 570S or a 488, you're definitely going to be like wanting to daily drive the NSX.
Or even the Ford GT. I've sat in one of those. That's a tiny little cockpit.
Yeah.
Like, it's cramped. It's not.
I'll
very
say this, the
comfortable.
GT is pretty drivable, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty reasonable car to drive.
I guess I sat in it with another person. And I was like, oh, I have no personal space at all in here.
The GT does feel more like a race car. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, it's
is.
like a Le Mans is essentially
Yeah.
what it is. I mean, the thing too, I think about like, the older NSX is it at its time was so sophisticated, but also like, to your point, it was so drivable. I mean, I'll name drop here. I drove an NSX, like a first generation, and I drove a Countach within maybe a couple year span. So it was not super fresh, but it was like, obviously you remember these like critical moments in your automotive journalism career. It's no comparison. I mean, like almost anybody could drive an NSX back
Yeah.
then. Countach would probably kill many people. You can't even see out of it. You have to lay down while you're driving it.
Mhm.
It's almost comical. Like the shifter was awful. I mean, would I drive the Lamborghini probably every day? Sure. It's awesome, especially on a closed course. But you could take the NSX and just drive it as part of your daily life. So I don't know. I think they didn't capture some of that magic in the new one, either in the accessibility or in like some of the just amazing shoot for the moon sort of
Mhm.
capabilities that they had before.
Yeah, they don't, Ferrari is on their game, Lamborghini is on their game. They make reliable cars. Is the Acura probably more reliable still? You could make that argument, but we can't prove one way or another. So it can't, they can't say that they're changing the game in that argument, in that sense, I suppose. I mean, what we are seeing is that, there was the Porsche 918 that had the hybrid supercar, and the NSX is also that same, type powertrain with a hybrid supercar. And, we're going to get later this month, Ferrari is going to reveal a hybrid supercar, which is supposed to have way more horsepower than the NSX. So perhaps the new NSX is pushing things forward in that way, in the fact that, there are more supercar makers that are going to be, looking to take advantage of that electric power in combination with their gas engine. But, from a historical standpoint, the new NSX hasn't made anywhere near the dent in history as the original actually did.
And that's why we've got a $20,000 discount on them. But I think you guys touched on something that I think it would be a better idea, instead of like trying to put discounts on their supercars, come out with another special variant. I mean, Ferrari and Lamborghini do this all the time. Porsche especially. Like, oh yeah, we got like 25 different versions of the 911, and they sell because people like to have a new special limited edition expensive something, and they're willing to pay for it too.
Absolutely.
That seems like a way. Like, I mean, come on, Honda, give us an NSX Type R. People would go crazy for that probably, even if it wasn't necessarily like world beating, just to be like, I've got the ultimate Type R.
I think that's a great
Yeah.
point. I mean, you don't improve your brand halo by cheapening it. You know, I think make something that's limited run, that's like super special. And then eventually you will maybe not have to put a $20,000 discount on the hood of your car. So that's a good idea. I mean, and it's not like Acura and the NSX does not have an awesome history. Like they could dip into the, the dusty bins of the past and pull something out. So we should probably leave it there. Move along to news out of Tesla this week. All kinds of crazy news with their stock price. The market's just closed here on Thursday, and it was around, I think about 195 is where it was around the close of the market. So, I mean, basically the analysts are really starting to like circle like vultures. Some of the biggest supporters of Tesla are now saying, I don't know, back off. Adam Jonas, to get really, granular here, he's been an analyst who's been really kind of a Tesla cheerleader at points, put that he could see the stock dropping to $10. So we're not Yahoo Finance. We're not going to really get into stock shares and prices and when you should buy or cash out. But overall, this, I think, is the first, I'd say, well, not the first, but this is a serious, I think, situation where we're seeing Tesla start to lose some of its credibility with the street. In the past, Ford could make a ton of money and it would be like, your stock's going to go down 35 cents. Here it's like Tesla is obviously having a bit of a checkered financial situation, and the analysts are like, guys, what's going on here? We're not going to keep recommending you. So I don't know. Is this a referendum on Tesla? Who knows? It's going to be $300 in July. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's tough, I think. There's signs that, Tesla is doing well. There's signs that Tesla is doing poorly. There's Model 3 stock now. It's not, you don't have to actually order a Model 3 and wait 5 billion years to get one. You can actually just look at what they have on their website and you can buy them. And I mean, that's a big change. The Model Y was revealed, I don't know how many months ago at this point, and that's still who knows how many months into the future as far as when they're going to get their next, big round of people wanting to buy it. It's a tough question. Like what really is the Model 3 demand? Can it continue like it is right now? The stock market is a little shaky for them right now. I was just looking at, over the past year, they were around $400, and, cutting that in half, that's a big deal. That really scares a lot of people. And it's just not exactly great news coming out of Tesla right now, it doesn't seem.
Thoughts, Joel?
Yeah, I mean, Tesla, I guess it feels a little bit like maybe the hype train is finally kind of coming to an end. I could be completely proven wrong. It could be that in a few months, Tesla will have another weird press conference or something. Elon Musk will promise some other wild, far-fetched thing, or even just dropping a little bit more information about like the Tesla Semi or the Tesla pickup truck. And we may see stock prices spike back up because people are like, oh, there's another Tesla product. This is going to be the best thing in the world. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to get more Tesla stock.
Right. People get fired up about Tesla.
Yeah.
And that's what boosts their stock. Because, I mean, the performance has been very uneven.
Yeah. And, I mean, the thing is, like, even though they have dropped a whole lot, their stock is still way, way more valuable than any other car maker on the stock market.
In some ways, this could be like their new normal. It's about $200 instead of $400. Yeah. And, I mean, frankly, I think most OEMs would take that every day of the week.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know. It may just be that maybe people are finally realizing that the car industry isn't necessarily a big profitable thing for when it comes to investing. I mean, I think the case has been for a long time with car companies that like you don't usually get big returns on car investment because like making cars is expensive. All the manufacturing and the engineering and the regulations and like it's not a high profit industry.
That's a great analysis. Yeah.
Like
I mean,
you're scraping the smallest amount of money out of every little thing. I mean, it's partly why pickup trucks are popular because that's one of the few vehicles that you can squeeze enormous amounts of profit out of.
right.
And I mean, it's also one of the reasons why, like back with the GM ignition thing way back, I mean, people were talking about like, oh, they could have fixed the issue for just a few pennies on the dollar. And it's like, but when you scale that up, that's millions and millions of dollars that they've managed to save out of it.
They still
Obviously-
should have fixed the
Yes,
issue.
Yeah.
obviously they
But-
should have fixed it. But like, it's kind of an example of like what automakers are like. They're trying to squeeze every last fraction of a cent out of everything that they build, and I think maybe Tesla is starting to run into this issue, and maybe investors are starting to kind of figure that out. Because I know that one of the analysts that was talking about Tesla was talking about that they've got a huge amount of debt right now, and there's not really great signs of them being able to get it paid off quickly.
So that's spending Tesla's money. Why don't we spend somebody else's money? We've got a good question here from the R Cars thread on Reddit. Pretty cool one. This is right in our wheelhouse. This is a writer from Chicago. $40,000 all in. This includes Chicago's ridiculous 11% taxes. Their words, not mine. I didn't know of this tax. So thinking about $36,000 actually. Wants to buy, can be either new or used, a sedan or a coupe, but looking for performance. Would like a manual. This is a daily driver that might go to the track. Warranty, yes. This is not their first vehicle, and they can do things like oil changes, brakes, tires, that sort of thing. Here's the short list. This is the BMW M 235/240, the 2019 Civic Type R, or the Volkswagen Golf R, potentially with a tuning kit bolted onto it. So we get this question a lot, kind of a daily driver, sometimes with some track blended in there. What do we think?
Yeah, so the one that really jumps out to me is the BMW M240i. That seems like it's going to strike a great balance between being fun to drive on the road and also being fun on the track. So you have the glorious inline-six engine in there. It makes a ton of power, sounds great, and it's rear-wheel drive. So that means that if you take it to the track, you can hang the rear end out if it's acceptable where you're at, I suppose. And on top of that, you get all the luxury and greatness about a BMW on the inside that you would expect. So all in, you're only getting 2 doors, instead of your big 4-door sedan. But I think that it's a good compromise to make in Chicago. You can buy winter tires in the snowy season and have a lot of fun with that thing. So I think that if you buy one of those, you get an M240i. Probably have to be used to get under your price limit there, but I think you're gonna love that car.
Nice. Joel, thoughts?
So the 2 hatchbacks are actually what jumped out at me first, the Type R and the Golf R. Both of them are great. I think the Type R has a little bit more character. It feels lighter, turning is sharper than like the Golf. Feels like you have to actually work a little bit more than the Golf R, and that's a positive for the Type R in my opinion. I've talked with one of our other editors in the office, Reese Counts, who's also owned a GTI. We both agree that the GTI is actually more fun than the Golf R because the Golf R, it almost does everything itself. Like you can just kind of point it in a direction and it just does what it needs to do. It's impressive, but it also doesn't feel as involving. But the Type R, it's comfortable, it's practical, the seats are great. Really, I think the only downside is that it's bold looking, to put it kindly.
I think that's underselling it even.
Yeah.
It's a little over the top.
Yeah.
The Golf R is way more subtle. Might look a little bit more professional if that's what you need. But I do have 3 sedan suggestions, 2 used, 1 new.
Let's hear them.
First would be Chevy Ss, which feels like almost an obligatory suggestion from car enthusiasts. That it's a big V8 rear drive sedan. You can get it with a manual. On the upside, it's actually plain and kind of subtle, so it doesn't scare people like a Type R might. It sounds phenomenal, and it feels chunky and involving. Like, it's got a big solid shifter, nice short throws, but also feels maybe a little bit notchy, like you got to work it a little bit. Yeah, and I mean, did I mention it's got a V8? Like, it sounds so good. It's fun to drive in that sense.
The SS is a great car. It really, in some ways, was underappreciated, I think. I mean, that's just a really kind of savvy, option here, I think. Especially, this guy sounds like an enthusiast. I think he would appreciate what that, kind of old school Chevy could do.
Yeah, and it's a big sedan, so it's pretty practical. Along those lines, I'd also suggest the Cadillac Ats-V, which is a personal favorite of mine. It handles so phenomenally well. It's really easy to drive. It looks cool. It's definitely track ready. And I like it a lot more than the SS. I think it's more composed. It's sharper. It's lighter. It's more nimble. Its smaller size would be easier to navigate in Chicago. And that would probably be my personal choice. But I'll also throw in, if you need a brand new car off the lot, I love the Genesis G70. It's not as powerful as actually everything else that we've listed so far, because it's only available with a 4-cylinder, but it has a spectacular chassis. It's so well balanced. It's so easy to balance it between understeer and oversteer. Like, you can make it do exactly what you want with very little effort. And it's got a nice interior. It's comfortable. It's a new car, so it would definitely have a warranty and stuff. Might even be able to get a good deal on it, since Genesis hasn't had great sales yet. But if you need a new car, I really like the Genesis, and it would have a much nicer interior than like Golf R or Type R. But if you're good with used, my personal preference would probably be Ats-V. It's just an amazing car to drive.
The solid choice. I mean, Joel's always great adding like just a couple different options here that you might not have thought of. My initial take was Golf R. All-wheel drive. It's a Volkswagen. It's practical. It's fun to drive. Like you said, Joel, it gets a little robotic, if you will. But, parking, driving in Chicago in the winter, it seems like that would be sort of like the Swiss Army knife. That could really, I think the car that might fit the lifestyle best. Now, is it going to be as much fun on the track? Probably not. Some of the cars that we've listed off here. The Chevy SS is always intriguing. I think it's, it's just that big old school V8 muscle car. I think the Ats-V, you get a little bit more it's a more modern car. It's probably a little more visceral than the SS even. I mean, the last time I drove an SS, that car was pretty dated and pretty raw, but I would include it in the short list. If you could go drive one, I would do it just to do it. I mean, I've driven them. They're awesome. You might decide that like you don't care that it's got like infotainment from like the early 2000s in there, and that you don't care about the plastics, and that's the car for you. But long story short, the M240i is what I'd go with. You just get the dynamics from BMW. You get, I think, a good looking car that you would be psyched to drive. I think it's very good on the track. So that's just where I would land. To me, that car feels special, and I would be fired up to drive it, almost every day. It would be a little rough in winter. You'd probably want to throw some snow tires on it, but I mean, that's where I would land when I'm really looking at how I would spend money. And I think actually the Genesis G70 that you put out, Joel, I mean, a brand new car that's that much fun, that, I mean, it's still plenty powerful for what you're going to do. I mean, that's intriguing too. So you've kind of got like a number of ways you could go here, I think, depending on like how much you care about, is this car new, and then what compromises you're willing to make sort of on a daily basis. Final thoughts on this? I think we all kind of gave them a little bit of misdirection, maybe like we tend to do with these. We add more cars in, we sort of confirm what they're saying, and then we take it back and we say, well, but you might want to look at this too. So I think we'll end with our standard disclaimer. Test drive as many of these as you can. Have some fun. Yeah. They're all a lot of fun. And speaking of fun, have a great weekend. It's Memorial Day holiday. It's late Thursday afternoon, so be safe out there. Take an Uber, take a Lyft. If you're going to be drinking, if you're throwing some hot dogs out the grill or something. But regardless, be safe out there, and we'll see you next time.